Welcome, everyone. It's another Wednesday, Sharing with Heart. I am super excited to be here with my two lovely people, Jenny Murtak and Swati Rohatsky, who are here with me discussing the beauty of guilt. And we've had an extensive conversation already around this topic prior to starting off with you all here today. And you will see it is very interesting how guilt actually shows up in our lives. And I'm sure all of us have somehow experienced feeling guilty, not showing up for someone, or feeling guilty, not being that amazing person that we can be, feeling guilty that we maybe said something that was disappointing, saddening, hurting someone else, right? And so there is this feeling that we are having that doesn't feel complete, satisfied. And we have this word guilt that can describe that conclusion of something. Well, as I'm practicing and preparing for today, and as I love to introduce myself last, my name is Raditya Lazary, and these topics just are things that I want to talk about with lovely people that I care for and that can really be open and honest with these conversations. And I'm super excited to be here today with the two of you. And Diana would have loved to be here with us, and she had to go someplace to take care of family. So she's here in spirit with us. And continuing the conversation around guilt really is to acknowledge, what is it really that makes us feel guilty? And additional to that, does guilt really exist in the way we think it exists? That might be a stretch because we're just at the beginning of this conversation. So maybe at the end, stick around and you will find out that there is so much more to guilt than we think. So when I was thinking about guilt this morning, I actually asked myself, how often have I felt guilty about something? And not to, underestimate guilt in my life, though I do feel that I haven't really discovered many moments that I feel guilty about. And I've been thinking about, looking back on life, like I'm like 80, 90 years old. And I'm just like, how that's usually those moments we say like, oh, I regret I didn't do this. Because for me, there were like shame and regret and, other words that fall into that same subject of guilt, like regretting not doing something, right? And so there's this do or didn't do. And I felt like, no, I feel like I always was standing up for things that I didn't do or did do. We're making mistakes. So why does guilt exist? So I'm going to hand it off right to my two lovely panelists and just see what comes up for them when they hear guilty and I am guilty or I feel guilty or experiencing anything around guilt.
I'll dive in. And you're right, this is going to be really juicy. I really enjoyed the pre-conversation. My brain's still going, whoa, we have a lot to unpack here. So she's right. Stick around to the end because it might be a twist. But when we do look at guilt, I look at it through the lens of parenthood a lot. That's my go-to. I'm parent coach with the parent empowerment movement. And I'm a parent of a young child right now. It's like, oh, so this is how I'm practicing and learning in guilt most often. So I think of that. And I've really been doing a lot of searching about this topic in the past couple of years as I've had a young child. And recognizing that for me, there's two different ideas about guilt. There's real guilt and fake guilt, as I think. And we might say there's no real guilt, who knows? I think that this idea of real guilt, when I say real guilt, I mean, there's a feeling, a thought process, something that is really genuinely inspired from us that can happen in different situations. So if we have real guilt, it's something that internally, that's where it was inspired. Either we're not happy with the outcomes, we're feeling like there's something we want to have different, we're not having our needs met, or we feel like we're not meeting other people's needs. So there's that genuinely inspired, I don't feel good about this and it's manifesting as guilt, that is very different than social constructs of guilt. And that's what I refer to as fake guilt. The guilt that we have of the shoulds, of people shoulding on us, as we say, the idea like, well, I should be doing this. I should be a better parent. I should be a better person. I should be a better employee. I should be a better daughter. I should be a better friend. And that isn't always coming from us internally. There's parts of us that are contributing to that, but a lot of it comes from these outside external variables. And it's more of a reflection of not matching other people's perceptions, not matching other people's ideas, not meeting other people at their energetic level, really. And it's just that mismatch instead of things being lined up. So there's a lot of different ways we can think about guilt. But I think the first one to think about when we first are willing to dive into our own guilt is this guilt that is genuinely residing within me, that's coming from my own feelings or my own thoughts about what I want and what is true for me? Or is this a reflection of things from the outside world aren't matching that and it doesn't line up?
I love that distinction between, internal, external. And I think when we do this practice, as you're asking us to like really look into a little bit, we might notice that a lot of them are more external than internal. Is my guess. Kind of like listening to you, it's like, I think there's more of that that would affect us in a way.
Yeah. There's so much, and I'm gonna just say there is too much. I believe there is legitimately too much, not just a lot. There is more than there needs to be. And again, I focus on parenthood a lot, but parents have so much more guilt than they have to have. Just like women have so much guilt than they have to have. So like any disadvantaged group of people have so much more guilt than is necessary. And I'm really looking forward to when we don't do that.
Oh, yes. Let's look forward to that. Swati, please share.
I'm loving where this conversation is going, because Jenny and Radhika, you got my gears moving. I was kind of feeling a little dull, but now my gears are moving, and I can recognize and see how there are two types of guilt. It's true, internal, external, you call it fake and real, yeah. And for me, it's actually interestingly the opposite. My situation is different. My son has special needs, and it's interesting. What's coming up for me is that the guilt that's coming from internally, because I'm taking care of a special needs child. It's there and it's internal, but I feel held when I feel that pain of that guilt. I feel held at the same time. Like there's a part of me that nurtures me. But the external guilt, for example, I always face this crisis with identity, my personal identity, like you say, you don't meet people on the same energetic level, and they get you thinking like they always, like there are people or relatives who'll always get me doubting me or something. And that's the external guilt. And that's when the pain stabs me and pierces me. I don't feel supported. But the internal guilt, there's also part of me that comes and holds me. So I feel like it's very interesting how I can recognize which one's for real and which one's coming from the outside now.
Oh my God. Yes, you are so right. We're going somewhere with this. We truly are. And again, these are things we briefly discussed this prior to this call, and that was about it. Just for everyone to know, there wasn't much of, getting to know each other's perspective on the subject. Although we spoke many times before about different topics, it does have always a new tone to this. And what I'm hearing from both of you saying is really that when we are truly connected to our inside world, no matter how turbulent it can become, we have this place of safety. We have this place of security. And it's building up from the inside out. It is a sign from what you both have shared that when we look outward, for validation, for confirmation, for whatever we're looking for on the outside world, we only are disappointed in the end, because it rarely is a resemblance or a reflection of how we see ourselves, especially when we're talking about the shoulds, right? When we're talking about how society is created by us humans, right? Society is not something outside of us that doesn't include us. We are just as much part of it as much as we make it, right? And so I've noticed now, unrelated to guilt, but very much related to this connection of inside outside, is like there is a way to be and move with society, right? Because that's the life we're living, the three of us in this room at least. And there is a way to recognize who we are and stay true on that part. And that's when we are like, it goes side by side, and sometimes it rubs off on us, and sometimes we can really distinctively say, okay, this is you, this is me, and I'm just going side by side. And that's the practice. This is what we're doing in these conversations, to really recognize what are those differences, right? Like, when is it too much? When is it too little? And when I'm in touch with myself? So as you notice, I'm not really talking about guilt as such, because I don't think guilt actually exists the way we think it exists. The way I see guilt existing is only, like Jenny described, as the fake, and as Swati described, as the external way of guilt. That's the only one I see is existing, which in fact does not exist. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, because it really is a very complex way of looking at it. But again, we created the word guilt. If we are present, and we had this conversation, so Jenny was bringing up an example, not an example, just describing what is real guilt, what is fake guilt, right? And I was asking myself, like, well, does even real guilt exist? Does it actually exist in the way? Because if I feel like I have certain standards of myself, right? They are like here, and I exceed them in a lower level. Does that mean that this space in between now tells me that I should feel guilty about myself because I didn't perform up here? I only performed my low here. We don't wake up every day being the same person, right? Every day is a different day. You go to bed, you feel good. You're like, wow, I'm so excited. Tomorrow is panel discussion day. I'm super excited to be here with all of you. And then morning comes around, your child maybe is not having a good day. Your spouse is maybe having a difficult call, or a family member is calling you and giving you bad news, or something is happening in your life. You are unable to meet your good place, right? Whatever good means in our lives, that place of contentment, that peacefulness, that amazing, energized person, which I feel like never actually happens so complete, so whole as we would want it to be, because something always comes our way. And to bring this to a conclusion, because I want to hear my dear panelists' input on this one, is really to see, like, how can we differentiate and move away from this huge word of guilt that just heavily weighs on us, that makes us feel less worthy of who we are, when in fact, we're just moving through life.
Wow, I love that. And you know, I was thinking when you talked about that level that we don't perform, sometimes, you know, we have a certain expectation, we don't perform. And what's that space? And I was thinking, of course, that space is guilt. But like, I'm also thinking, like, what can we replace that with? And what's coming to me is compassion. Place it with compassion. Uh, to break the cycle, because yeah, because I just get into this, you know, I think rage loves pain, pain loves rage, and then comes guilt. And then you're in this loop, and then you're not only doing it to yourself, but you're doing it to people around you. You're spreading that energy. What if you just move with compassion for yourself? Then what are you going to spread? Compassion.
Okay, that was really, really good. So I was going to say that the space is filled by these other emotions, and you just put in such a beautiful piece of that puzzle to make that complete, to make that the full circle of, oh my gosh, okay, I really, really love what you said, that you said the word compassion. So I think that we've got this idea about guilt. And when I think about it, I don't think it's actually a feeling, even though we say, I feel guilty. I think we have the thought processes, our logic, our assessment, all of those human brain things. We humans like to think things to death. We have those ideas and we interpret them as guilt. But the feelings I think of, you know, if I'm wanting to be here, but I get here, I might have disappointment. I might have sadness, or I might have anger, those more basic things that are actually true feelings. And the other piece to complete that cycle, because those feelings are tools, those feelings are valid and worthy and part of growth, and you put in compassion and you're allowed to use them. You're allowed to have them. I think of the Pixar movie Inside Out, and how at the end you're seeing the beautiful role that sadness has. That sadness helps the imaginary friend process the fact that he lost his spaceship wagon. If you haven't seen Inside Out, this probably sounds really goofy, but it showcases the different emotions, and joy is always there. It's like, we got to do this. We got to be happy. We got to be upbeat. And I think we've had this conversation in society more now about toxic positivity, where positivity is wonderful. And when we try to slather it on in this big, thick frosting layer, it's not always appropriate, and it doesn't do its job, and it becomes sickly sweet. And when we also make room for sadness, which we don't necessarily view as frosting or a sprinkle or chocolate chip, I don't know how I got into the food analogy, but I'm going there. If we, you know, allow ourselves to have those other experiences, those other emotions, with compassion for ourselves and compassion for our journey, then we actually move forward. So don't think that guilt is a true emotion or feeling. So therefore, I don't think guilt really exists, because if we're just thinking about it, if it's just a thought, well, a thought's just a thought. A thought doesn't have any substance to it. It doesn't have any molecular structure. It's just a thought, which kind of scares us sometimes. But I think you might be right, Raditya. I think guilt might not actually exist. I think this is really cool.
I want to say, first and foremost, this was amazing. Also, because next week's conversation would have been, or at least my focus is compassion, to really close this month of February of discomfort. You know, we started off with, I don't remember, and then it was it was stress, and now guilt, and then there was compassion, right? And it warmed my heart when you said this, Swati, the way you described it, you know, like, what can I replace it with? Because this is really, really important, because there's always something we can replace something with, right? We can replace our anger with care. We can replace sadness with joy. and not to diminish sadness or to diminish anger or to diminish these other uncomfortable feelings. They have to be recognized as much as that so-called guilt. I mean, I want to get into a different aspects of it in a moment. But I also noticed this as we're speaking about it is because we get so caught up in these negative emotions that weigh us down that we forget that there is an opposite to it, right? It's the same thing we were saying outside this conversation about, like, yeah, without dark there is no light, right? Jenny was saying this. And then Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus, right? And I was bringing the analogy the other day about roses and horse poop. You know, I mean, there is always these things that you think they can't be with each other. What we need to do is bring in, first and foremost, compassion to that feeling we're having, that truthful feeling we're experiencing. And then moving through it, something else will come up. But if we stay stuck with that other emotion, with anger, with sadness, with everything that can actually destroy anything on our path, we won't see it. Our eyes are closed, our hearts are closed, and we want to open it up. And compassion is that piece in between. And I just want to bring another aspect of guilt in, because the other thing that I had in mind when we use guilt as a thing, right, is injustice. We call people, you are guilty, which makes them be that part, right? We don't have compassion in justice. There is black and white. There is right or wrong. I mean, who is putting that down? We humans have created these rules. For whatever reason, they've been created, because I'm no lawyer or any specialist in here, so I'm not going to touch that subject. Though I know that if I was called to be guilty, if someone would point the finger at me and say, you are guilty for doing this, and you now have to sit in your room, you know, that what we do as parents with our children, right? Like, oh, you get a timeout. Or you are really doing something tremendously dangerous, or you're, you know, getting yourself into jail, as an example. This is like the highest version of a timeout in your room, right? It's actually the same thing. We're not allowing that person to really share their experience of what has happened. We diminish that person's experience. We're putting that person into a box and telling them, you are wrong. You did something to hurt whoever you hurt. But how about looking at the hurt that person might have had to even go there, right? Because if I remember when I was growing up, I wasn't always this kind and loving child that I could have been. There was pain in me too. And the way I expressed pain, the way I was able to feel whole, was by sometimes bullying other people, by cheating on loved ones. And I'm not proud to have done these things. At the same time, I do not feel guilty having done those things in the way we as society would think of those things. But what I now have is compassion for myself when I was that age, when I was doing those things, because some of my needs were not met. Some of the things that I was experiencing were not met. And unfortunately, I did not know how else to get the attention. I did not know how else to voice my pain, my experience inside. So I had to do something external to really do that. And I'm only bringing this in here because I know that when I shared for the first time that I bullied someone in my later years, I had fingers pointing at me. They were like, oh, you were that one, right? Because they were bullied. And they felt like, oh, she is that person, when in fact, it doesn't matter what you did or what you done. And this is for me to just let you know, do not feel guilty in your life for have done something that you hurt other people, because you don't hurt other people if you're not hurting yourself. And this is just one message I want to share here, because we have to be careful when we call other people guilty of something, at the same time pointing the finger ourselves to call ourselves guilty for something, because that is not the truth. And this is how I can say that guilt does not exist, and that the only way to overcome is what Swati has brought to us, is compassion. And so before we go into all these beautiful other things, I know Jenny is probably having something to share, and I know Swati will have something to share. So please join me.
Did you see all the gears going as you were talking? Oh, I'm so grateful for everything you said, Raditya. I've long been thinking that the way we'll never be able to change our justice system until we change how we discipline children, because going to jail is like, yeah, it's just a higher level of go to your room, of timeout. And I think people can hear that and think, like that diminishes it so much, but there was this bigger thing. It's like, but it's still the approach we're using. And so what we're talking about here, I think, comes down to, there's room to have compassion and still have expectations. There's room to have compassion and still hold people accountable for respect and valuing and honoring their own and other people's needs. There's room for both of those. We just haven't necessarily in this country figured out the best way to do that. But you look at other systems where their process is not a system of punishment, it's a system of rehabilitation. And that's what a lot of us have turned to as parents too, because I can punish my small child for doing something wrong. I can instill some suffering because that's the way he learns not to do it. But that's all he learns, is don't do that thing and get caught. If I want to teach him what else he can do, that's my guiding moment. And I can do that compassionately. I can have compassion, like, oh, I see what led you to do this. I see that you were feeling so sad. You were feeling so angry about that. And you did this thing. Now it had this repercussion. So let's see how we can rebuild this together. Let's see how we can move forward and give you tools to do something different in the future. Because it's not just enough to give people the tools. You also have to give them that compassion, because they have unmet needs too. And it's not going to work to just say, do better, do better, do better, but you're not giving people a more solid foundation to stand on. That compassion has to be there. Swati, I think you did such a service bringing that word into this conversation. It's so true. And really, we wouldn't have, going back to the phrase I use, fake guilt, if we were having more compassion for each other and for ourselves. We are not going to hold guilt to ourselves if we have more compassion. We're not going to place guilt on others if we have more compassion. We can still ask for certain things. We can still say, I want to be treated this way. I'm asking to receive this from you. And that's so different than just placing guilt for it not happening. Raditya, I was talking to you before this conversation, before our pre-conversation of guilt, about how, I'm working through some anger on something, and oh man, this hits home. I have to go back to compassion if I want peace, because it's not going to happen through anger. Anger is a beautiful tool telling me, hey, stand up for yourself, because this need is not being met, and that's important. But anger has that job. It doesn't have the other job of fixing the problem. So.
Oh my God, this was so good. Yes.
I'm loving this conversation.
Here to show us where we're stuck, but it's not here to fix the problem. This is like, write that down. Gotta try to remember here. I don't know. Yes, Swati, please jump in.
I think Jenny's covered the crux of it, but I just want to share my own experience that I know that the missing piece is compassion. I'm the one who brought it up, but I can't practice it myself. It's difficult. And it's difficult because I come from a place of insecurity. And I feel threatened. And when I feel threatened, my survival instinct kicks in and I'm like, I'm just gonna pounce at you. I want blood. I want to stand up for myself, and it's gonna be a blood sport in my head. And it's really bad. And then I just get into the same loop: pain, suffering, rage, sadness, anger, and then when I realized that the other person is not even the intention was not even there, it's just who they are, or they were not as mindful of what they said, then comes guilt, which probably is made up, it's created, of course. But I'm still just trying to understand, like, probably I think a good place to start is from yourself, right? One has to build this strong foundation, like, I am safe, I am secure, and I'm compassionate with myself. And then I can probably have this conversation with the external world, or kind of this energy exchange where I know that I can, like Jenny said, you can have compassion, but you can also tell them what you want to receive, what your needs are. So just wanted to share that.
That's wonderful. And I think one piece we can add to compassion is when it's difficult to get to compassion. And I know that what I'm saying is not necessarily easier. It's just maybe another aspect of it is forgiveness. Because there is, and again, it's not easy to do either. It is really I just wrote someone ask for forgiveness for something that happened 6 months ago. And she just responded to me. It's like, most importantly, you have to forgive yourself. And so that is the first step, right? Forgiving ourselves when we do have this so-called guilt creep up on us, and we feel like, oh, I should have responded differently, and I should have not done this, or if only I could have been there and seeing that pain that they're going through, right? Like, if only we can see it that way. Forgiveness would allow us to let it just be there. Forgiving doesn't mean I'm condoning it or I'm saying it's okay, like, yeah, do it again, like, that was good. It's just letting us know that we all make mistakes. And the other thing that came to me this past, I think on Monday when I was talking to a friend, is like, I see life not as accomplishing something as we go along. I see life as part of being a practice and reminding us how to become that person that we want to be. Because even if I'm putting all the great efforts in right now, that person that I want to be is the one at the end of my life. It is not the person next week, in a year, or 5 years from now, unless that is your last day of your life. We are here to always improve ourselves. If we are interested in being a human being, acknowledging the things that we are doing, this is our journey. Our journey doesn't end to have overcome anger, to overcome guilt, to overcome stress, to overcome this discomfort. No, life is here to remind us how to deal with these difficult moments that come our way. And that will take compassion, that will take care for one another. And it initiates from what we are here to be. And that's to be love. We are created through love, most of us, hopefully, right? There are some people that are on this earth that probably have a difficulty with that sentiment of being born into this world. So, but beside, like for a general speaking, and even for those, in the end, love is what drives us. And actually, I took a retreat on Saturday, and I had to take a vow. And my vow was to love everyone, even when it's difficult, and to love myself, even when it's difficult. And that is compassion, forgiveness. It's all those things in between, right? That we can do for us to change the way we see ourselves. So this is my last piece for today. Please share your last pieces and whatever takeaways you have.
I had one, but then you said all these beautiful words and I'm savoring them right now. This has been so inspirational. Oh, I'm thinking of like, man, I'm growing so much still. That's what it all comes down to for me. Like, I am a grown up. I am not done growing. And this is a perfect example of this. We are here to learn, exactly like you said, Raditya. We are not done growing just because our physical bodies have, we've stopped getting taller. There's so much more to growth than that. So thank you very, very much, both of you. I'm so grateful for the growth you've helped me with personally this morning. Thank you.
And I'll just echo what Raditya said. What's beneath guilt? It's love. And yeah, that's our core. We just have to. Buddha says it's always here. We just have to turn to it.
Right.
So, yeah. And thank you for bringing that piece of forgiveness. I think that was the missing piece. I'm like holding on to rage and anger. I'm like, what do I need? Of course I need to forgive. I need to let go now. Because I'm holding on too much. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Swati, this retreat on Saturday, people brought questions and concerns on how to practice and do this better. And, and it really got me to think that we try too hard, people. We are trying way too hard. Life does not have to be difficult. And yes, we already have the answers inside of us. So let's stop looking outward for validation, for acknowledgement, for love, for care. If we can give it to ourselves, nobody will fill that void. Nobody. So we have to make that first step to ourselves. Look in the mirror. Tell yourself what you love about yourself. It can be beginning with having a great family. It can be, it can be very far away from your actual being. If that's what you can get to that. If at some point you can say, you have beautiful eyes, you have a beautiful smile, which we all do, actually. That's the first one I can say. But if you don't think so, practice with something else first. It really is already inside of us. And if we can't see it, nobody will. So I want to close today with a humongous gratitude to the two of you, for anybody who's watching, who is willing to step into their 2 feet, look in the mirror and tell themselves how wonderful they are, because you are wonderful. You just have to see it. So thank you everyone for being here. Till next time, which is, we're taking a 6-week break because no, 7 weeks break, because I have a workshop coming up. So if you will really love what you're seeing, it starts in 2 weeks at this time, 10 a.m. till 11. It's What is Mindfulness? You will get to learn all about this, on where do we even start? And it's as easy as taking an in breath and having an out breath. So with this, welcome and thank you.